Yeah, folks, this might be a pretty crazy month in Marvel Snap because I think we have some really good cards landing in July. We just got the season pass video and we now know the final stats and the final texts for all of the cards landing in July, which means it's time to lock in some predictions, rating each of these cards from 1 to 4 stars. And I certainly think we're going to have some 4-star cards in this video. So let's go ahead and kick things off here with the season pass card, Mr. Fantastic, Fantastic Four First Steps, which, boy, that is a mouthful. I think we'll probably just call this First Steps Mr. Fantastic, which is still a mouthful, but gets us a little closer. Now, last time when we saw this card in the initial data mined versions, it was a 2/3. It has gotten a little bit of a nerf since then. It's now a 2/2, which makes sense. Thought it was really, really good when we saw it initially, and still think it's really good as a 2/2, frankly. With this end of turn, give a card in your hand -1 cost or +2 power, which will sound familiar. That's a lot like Phastos's on reveal effect, except, you know, that, of course, is hitting cards in deck. Mr. Fantastic is hitting cards in hand. Now, Phastos has been a mediocre card at best. We've never really seen Phastos like shine in top meta decks or anything. It's like popped into some Surfer lists and some other random things here and there. It's fine. So you might think, well, I don't really like Mr. Fantastic much if I don't like Phastos much, but I do think this one's notably better for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's just cheaper, and that is like the number one reason. Being able to get this down on 2 is much less of a commitment. Like turn 3 is a really important turn in Marvel Snap. So many powerful things to do on turn 3, particularly for decks that interact with buffs, which Mr. Fantastic would certainly encourage with this +2 power. Think about things like, you know, Broods or Sebastian Shaws. Those sorts of things can be great for a turn 3 play after turn 2 on Mr. Fantastic if he hits really well. So just getting him down sooner, it's just less total commitment from an energy standpoint and more like choices as well sooner. You just start making an impact with these kinds of plays quicker, which does matter. Like, again, like using your turn 3 with Phastos, maybe Brood and Sebastian Shaw both don't fit suddenly. It's like, God, I can't just squeeze all of this stuff together. Mr. Fantastic just really greases the wheels, makes things so much smoother from a curve standpoint with only just that one energy change. I also think the fact that it's hitting in hand and instead of in deck also just gives you a little bit more like kind of planning upside. Like technically you're still only seeing 1 card per turn. You know, this is end of turn in hand as opposed to like drawing 1 card per turn with Phastos. They kind of line up similarly in that way, but something about it being in hand, you just, you know, like you kind of have a plan for how your cards are going to be played, little 2-card combos, little lines. Like I got this 5-drop I'm hoping to play. And like the cost discount here could shift that around a little bit, but you're still going to have like more guidance. Whereas with Phastos, you're kind of always playing with this like surprise factor where it's like, okay, am I going to top deck a discounted card? Am I going to top deck a really awesome buff target? And you just don't really know. And sometimes you have to like pivot and adjust things, which can change other plays. So I think just like from a sequencing and planning and knowledge standpoint, I suspect the end of turn is actually going to feel a lot better to execute your turns than it will for Phastos. So on that note, it's all about like deck fit, right? Is this good enough to make the cut in just like a bunch of different decks? Frankly, this could be kind of like a Surge adjacent card that just goes in any deck. I don't know that it's better than Surge necessarily, but a similar space could just be in any deck, like any good tempo deck like Surge. But I think there are, you know, good fits for like buff specific decks. We've seen those shining more and more and more lately, particularly, you know, as a hand buff card here. Like you could even do like Clea stuff. I don't think that's the right way, but you know, we already talked about Brood, Shaw, full on buff decks, Mr. Sinisters, all of those are really nice with Mr. Fantastic. On top of that, Silver Surfer, I think, is actually a really good package for this. Number one, because it can merge those 2 packages together really effectively, buffs and Surfer, but also cost discounts in Surfer can really help a lot because anytime you take a 3-cost card down to 2, that creates a lot of opportunity on turn 5 in particular. And if your deck is stuffed with 3-cost cards, pretty good chance that's going to happen on occasion with Mr. Fantastic and really create some cool curve opportunities. So in other words, yes, 100%. I see lots of decks for this, maybe just any deck, number one. And then buff specific decks, Surfer decks are really good fits. Also, of course, we should talk about the fact that we're going to be seeing a bunch of Fantastic Four First Steps cards in this video that tie end of turn synergies together and also reinforce buff synergies. They play really, really well with buffs. So not only is that maybe its own deck with end of turn, but also just making the buff package we already talked about way more important and way better, and just giving it some like crazy powerhouse hits. So like a first steps buff deck might be the number one place to go with Mr. Fantastic. Even beyond that, though, I think this card looks very good, even though it got nerfed a bit. So moving on to our next card here, this is Fantasticar. This is now a 4/7. When we initially saw this, it was a 4/6. Kind of surprised by that. I thought this was already looking like a pretty good card as a 4/6, because this activate is just like a lot of just solid free power. Give your end of turn cards +2 power. And, you know, I didn't think it was hard to get 4 or 5 end of turn cards, particularly like we said, the first steps cards. A lot of end of turn stuff is going to be here and play for end of turn stuff. So like a Fantastic Four first steps deck with this just makes way too much sense. There are a surprising number of other end of turn cards which you can just kind of toss into decks as well. I was looking at the list, you know, H.E.R.B.I.E, a Red Hulk, Havoc, you know, whatever, right? There's a lot of actually pretty solid options. It was like Makari is pretty good, like little stuff you wouldn't expect. So getting 4 or 5 buffs out of this is not hard, which means that's 8, 10, 12 extra power on this, which is kind of insane on a card that's already a 4/7. And you know, getting 2 hits on this actually makes this pretty competitive already. That would push it up to a 4/11 in total output, you know, 7 + 2 + 2. That's all you really need to make this look exciting. And then even from there is just bonus, right? And I think a lot of decks could very much play to that bonus. Not to mention this +2 power is going to interact really well with other Fantastic Four first steps cards. Like a lot of these scale with the additional powers. Like Human Torch is going to multiply that buff even more. So man, this is just like really, really pushed as far as I'm concerned from a numbers standpoint. Looks really good in a buff first steps deck, which I think is going to be a thing. 4/7's a really nice base stat line, and the push from there is nuts. You know, I am stunned this got buffed. I think that's going to add a lot of fuel to the fire around this card's conversation. I don't still know if this has actually been confirmed. I didn't notice it in the reveal video, but the data mines are all pointing to at least this being the super premium pass card that you have to pay an extra $10 for on top of the normal premium pass. So, you know, Mr. Fantastic is the premium pass for $10. Go up to 20 and you get Fantasticar, which I think a lot of people are already going to be stressed about because it's just adding kind of an extra $10 a month overhead to the game, which, you know, like $10 is efficient compared to like normally just outright buying a card in Marvel Snap, but it does still create that pressure and that time gap for free-to-play players, of course. So, you know, that conversation gets even more pointed if they buffed this to make it more desirable, which I think it already looked desirable as a 4/6, and it just got even better, even more push. So again, we'll let that discourse unfold in the comments. I'm kind of over talking about Marvel Snap discourse stuff beyond just giving you guys the context here, but the takeaway for me is that this card, I think, looks very, very powerful and will be a big part, potentially, of end of turn Fantastic Four first steps decks, which might take, you know, till the end of the month to really get there with like Invisible Woman's release. So maybe a little soft for the first few weeks, although I suspect we could still put together a decent deck, and it'll really get good essentially by the end of the month. So next up here is H.E.R.B.I.E. He is now a 2/3. This one actually got a bit of a buff, I think, from a 2/2. He reads, each turn this is in play, swap to a new activate ability until one is used. Those activates are next turn, you get +2 energy, which does make him just way better than Jennifer Kale when you hit that particular one, but it's unreliable. Jennifer, you know, you can get it on time. This one, you know, may come at a weird moment where that energy is not useful just because it's too late to use it all, or, you know, just doesn't open up a good curve hit. We've also got give 2 of your cards at each other location +1 power, which this one changed a little bit. I believe before it buffed all of the cards at other locations potentially, but it was only adjacent locations. So you were kind of forced to like push this one mid if you really wanted to maximize that. So they've pulled down the like power output ceiling, but now this works at any location. So you can play H.E.R.B.I.E anywhere and he still works. You don't have to play him in the middle location. So a little bit more flexibility, a little less total output. I think that's probably a net win overall. It also means you don't have to like stuff locations as much because it's capped at 2 cards per location, so you don't have to go like 4 across to feel like he's getting full upside on that. So, but ultimately, right, that's generally just going to be +4 power if you just want to break that down, which, you know, that's a 2/7 total output on a 2-drop. That's pretty good. It's above rate for 2-drops. And again, of course, that power can scale really nicely. Sebastian Shaw, Human Torch, First Steps, etc. We're going to see cards that really love that in the Fantastic Four universe and otherwise. Next up is activate, create a rock here and set its power to 4. Again, just nice 4 power bonus. This is kind of, I think, like the backup option. It's like nothing else lined up, nothing else hit. I just need some solid numbers. I don't think you're playing this in a Patriot deck or anything like that, but just, you know, solid base output. Maybe if you need to fill a location for some reason or whatever, this one hits, or you're just not willing to risk the other ones. And then finally, activate, double this card's power. Again, this one is kind of a backup that's a 2/6 output in total. It's pretty solid already for a 2-drop, but keep in mind, you know, we already saw stuff like Mr. Fantastic could buff this up to a 2/5. If you're playing this in a buff deck with lots of other buffs, there's going to be ways to push this up, forge it into a 2/5. Then it becomes a 2/10 thanks to this activate. That's actually got a lot of upside and could push some really, really big numbers potentially for Herbie. So I think, again, this is actually just a really good card. You know, activate is a bit weird sometimes with timing. It makes this kind of a bad play on turn 6, those sorts of things. Hold activate cards down a little bit, but I think the results here are all solid. You know, I guess the +2 energy one might sometimes feel a little useless, but it's still going to create lots of moments and lots of good plays. It just doesn't contribute maybe to a buff game plan quite as directly, but +2 energy is +2 energy. Nothing wrong with that, right? So I think all of these are solid at worst and nuts at best, which I think, again, means this is just a really good card that can actually, again, be played in a lot of decks. I think basically all of the cards in this video, at least the Fantastic Four themed ones of the team themselves, are going to be played in the same deck. There's just going to be a First Steps deck that's really good, and that's going to give all of these a home. Then I actually think all 3 of the cards we've seen so far might even extend beyond that. Like, there might be an end of turn deck. Herbie is good enough that he's like got a general utility vibe. A ramp deck or something could utilize this for some bonus energy sometimes. You know, it's still a solid 2-drop. Like, there's just good plays for this. All 3 of these cards just seem very good to me. So next up here is Human Torch, First Steps. He is a 3/2. End of turn, +1 power. Once per game, if your side here is full, double this card's power instead. So this is starting at a 3/2, but he's gaining +1 every turn. So if you play him on turn 3, right, he's gaining power on 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's 4 turns. He kind of naturally goes up to a 3/6, which pretty solid, right? Like, if playing on curve, that's already pretty solid. But then you've got this additional upside with the once per game aspect of this, where if you've managed to fill his given location, which, you know, keep in mind, like, Herbie could make a rock to do that. That might be a good reason to choose a rock. You could have a Brood and a Silver Surfer deck. Lots of ways to easily fill out locations. As we know, play a Rhino with a rock, whatever. You know, I love Rhino. I'm always looking for excuses to put Rhino in any given deck. Then you get to double this. Now, it does say instead, so I don't think you get the +1 power on that turn. Let's say like on turn 6 is probably when you'd want to do that. So this might go to a 3/5, and then you double it instead of gaining your +1 power. That pushes this up to a 3/10, which, of course, 3/10 is amazing. Now, keep in mind, of course, on top of that, any other buffs this gets, whether that be from Mr. Fantastic First Steps, say a Silver Surfer, because this is, again, happening end of turn, so you can play that turn 6 Silver Surfer, push this up to 3/7, 3/9 at a baseline, then double that sucker up to 3/18. This could single-handedly carry locations. It doesn't need a ton of support necessarily to carry a location when you talk about all these crazy buff scaling possibilities. I think decks that are playing this are going to pretty reliably achieve filling a location. So therefore, I think this card is, again, pretty nuts. Now, I will say this one's definitely a bit more narrow and focused than the previous cards we've seen. I think probably only 1 or 2 decks really make sense here. Again, a First Steps deck, a buff deck like that will probably be a natural home for this, of course. All these cards just work so well together. And Silver Surfer is going to be a home for this as well. Beyond that, you know, maybe not just like a good general use tempo card, but still 2 very promising packages that can use this incredibly successfully and will probably feel like a bit of a carry card in those decks where it's just like soloing a location. Also, keep in mind, it's great at dodging Shang-Chi. it's end of turn. So if you do this at the end of game, end of turn, that's when you choose to fill your location. Shang-Chi is going to be useless against this. He'll have already revealed, and then this will go off later and dodge Shang-Chi, or even like Shadow King, minus like Invisible Woman or whatever. So just, again, really strong, really high power output card. All of these just look so good. Speaking of that, here's the Thing first steps. He is a 5/6 with end of turn, +2 power, and once per game, if your side here is full, destroy an enemy card here with less power. So this is, 5/6 at a base. It's going to go off twice, presumably, right? That's +4 total power additional. That pushes Thing up to a 5/10, which is actually pretty big in the scheme of 5 drops. 5/10 is about as big as they get. Now, you wouldn't be excited, I think, just to play this as only a 5/10, though. Like, that's not going to be good enough. We have just better things to do with that energy. So you do probably have to activate this once per game effect to really make this feel worth it. Where, again, this does not say instead. This one is actually still going to give you the +2 power. So he'd still go to 5/10 and then destroy a card with less power. So, 9 or less getting destroyed. It does say just an enemy card. It's not like targeted the highest power or anything like that. So you could destroy a 1-drop. You could destroy a 9 power card somewhere in the middle. On average, you're probably going to destroy like 4 power or something with your Thing, which on average might make this look about like a 5/14, which again is big. It could occasionally also, of course, just be way bigger. Also, you can buff this to make that even bigger, destroy some 10 power stuff, whatever. But I will say, I think the demands on this one are a little shakier for me because filling out a given location with the Thing feels worse to me. Like it's like a really big commitment for potentially not as reliable of an output. Human Torch, you're controlling how big it's going to get. You have an expected result. You kind of know all of that's going to work well. The Thing, the opponent has a little bit more control over it. They can stuff tokens in there to make it potentially hit some weak stuff. It's just RNG. And if you're already committing such a high cost and high power card at a base, 5 cost, 10 power already committed, committing even more stuff to fill out the location could maybe feel like an overcommitment. Like, there are ways to get around that. Maybe you just play this in like a zoo deck or something that's stuffing locations as opposed to really thinking about it more in a like buff deck. Maybe a first steps deck actually kind of ducks away from this one and Thing carves out a spot in more like a zoo deck that's going to be able to better utilize that. Maybe play an Ultron afterwards, whatever it is, right? There might be some other ways to make sure this is not an overcommitment in essence from a location standpoint, playing too many things, going too hard into a given spot. Because I could see that really being the problem for this one. It's just like that demand might be too much, and the cost is part of it. It's just like it's 5. It's your entire turn 5 or whatever. So that would be the issue here for me with Thing. So I do think this is kind of the least powerful, least exciting maybe of the Fantastic Four first steps cards. And I don't even think it's bad. I think it still is fine. Still plays well with Fantasticar. Still probably goes in that deck. Maybe just has a little bit less flexibility and kind of flexibility both in-game and across the spectrum from a dex standpoint. All right, so our final first steps member here is Invisible Woman, of course. She's now a 3/5. We saw this as a 3/4 initially in the data mines. She's got activate this turn. Your end of turn abilities happen twice. So an additional way, of course, just to ratchet up all of the other first step cards and members here. Now, I will say, like, it's not crazy outputs. +2 on Thing, +1 on Torch. That's like +3, and then Mr. Fantastic and maybe another +2. It's kind of like +5 if things go perfectly and all those cards are down. That won't always happen, but it's not like obscenely broken numbers. Also keep in mind, I guess, Thing and Torch have kind of a once per game, so I guess that part probably can't go off twice. With Invisible Woman, nothing like that, so that's not going to add like crazy scaling here. So I think just kind of a solid, boost essentially to the first steps package. I was also looking, at the end of turn cards currently in the game right now, if there's anything else that's like crazy broken. I mean, there could be, right? Like Isan could be just totally nuts, I was thinking, right? I mean, like Sunspot, technically you could like pass and like double tap on Sunspot. even stuff like Marvel Boy and Doom 2099, like probably not better than the first steps cards necessarily, but you know, really solid hits. I'm trying to think about a deck that maybe utilizes all these things together, you know, Athena and Havoc, Red Hulk, all in various phases, giving a little bit extra power compared to like the Thing or the Human Torch. So there are a few other cards that might boost this even further, and trying to build a deck around the end of turn package as opposed to a buff first step package probably becomes a realistic thing thanks to Fantasticar and Invisible Woman. So I think these cards could kind of do double duty in a first steps deck, of course, just because it makes way too much sense. But then also at the end of the month, we might see an end of turn deck that's just running Fantasticar and Invisible Woman. Maybe it still has Torture Thing, maybe it doesn't, whatever, right? It probably still has Mr. Fantastic, but it might bring in other angles that you know, maybe it's Athena deck or whatever, right? Maybe there's other ways to get extra boost out of it, and it's less about first steps and it's more specifically about end of turn. I think Invisible Woman's really solid there, and as a 3/5, right, good baseline. I think that's probably why they gave this card a buff, because the ceiling's not too crazy high most of the time, because you just have a hard time getting enough cards down, frankly. But with a good floor of 5, still, again, I think looks like a very solid, very, very good card, frankly. So next up here, we got, I guess, some villains, maybe. Mole Man is a 3/3. On reveal, banish the top card of your deck, add 2 rocks to your hand, set their power to the banished card's cost. This one is unchanged, since we very recently, in fact, looked at this one in the data mines, but I do like this card fairly well. So basically 3/3 at a base, and then, you know, your ideal here is to banish something expensive. You want to banish, say, a 5 or 6 cost card. Then you're going to get some rocks that have, you know, 5 or 6 power. Again, a reminder, this is setting their power to the cost, not setting their power to the power. You can't banish an Infinite and get a 20 power rock. It's still going to be a 6 power rock. So generally they'll be capped at 6, although of course technically 7 and 8 cost cards exist. You could, you know, banish a Death and get some 8 power rocks, which would be insane. So I would say, like, best case scenario, this is kind of like adding a couple demons to your hand, a la the Hood, right? But in essence, it's a 5 cost total play, 3 for Mole Man, 1 for each rock. Theoretically, you get up to kind of like 15 power if you hit, you know, 6 drop. But of course, there's the downside if you hit small stuff. Oh boy, it's gonna suck a little bit. You know, hitting some 2 power rocks might not feel as good. That's kind of looking like a 5/7 in total output for Mole Man, because you get a 2, a 2, and a 3. So, you know, I'd say there's a sweet spot somewhere around 4 that feels probably worth it and good, just because, of course, we've seen before, like, you know, Kate Bishop, Merlin, all these cards that add cheap good stuff to hand can be very powerful, because the flexibility, the ability to dump that, the ability to synergize with other things. You know, you've got kind of like Black Swan packages could push these rocks down to 0. You've got like Hit Monkey pop-offs where you're just trying to get a handful of all stuff that might go together, right? Much like Kate Bishop creates those opportunities, Merlin, you know, these won't be like on reveals for Werewolf, but, you know, still a few different ways to slice this might be worth it. Now, the problem with all those examples I just gave you, right, is that those decks run low cost cards. The more low cost cards you have, the worse your rocks are going to be. You kind of want to play Mole Man in like a big deck that's running a bunch of big cards. So I do think there's a tough deck building challenge around this that's going to be hard to overcome. I could maybe see something like a ramp deck that just occasionally wants some energy flexibility. You know, it's, you know, on turn, if you have ramp with Luna Snow, you go into turn 6, you have 7 energy, right? You play a 6 drop and a big rock, and having that kind of flexibility might be nice. But you don't always want to play Mole Man on turn 3 in a ramp deck or later, right? It might be hard to weave in. So something about this is it's just falling in these little gaps here from a deck building standpoint, from a line standpoint. There's other stuff like Patriot you could maybe explore with this, but it still doesn't feel good to me for a lot of those same reasons. I think this card's going to end up being very awkward. I think this is one of those cards where if it was a 2-drop, it would be so much easier for a lot of decks to make this work. It wouldn't feel as much like a big commitment. It'd be kind of a Kate Bishop alternative that some decks might prefer a little bit to something like Kate, just because they have, you know, slightly higher costs or whatever. But as it stands, I don't know. And we haven't even talked about the fact that, you know, banishing your card sometimes could matter too. Like, you know, if you're playing a big 6-drop you love and you banish it, and it's kind of like doing nothing, but also could occasionally feel really bad. And particularly if it shows your opponents, could give them a lot of informational upside as well, knowing what you do or don't have. So in essence, I think there's too many downsides on this right now. I don't totally hate it. I can see a lot of fun decks to try with this. I don't think it's a terrible card by any means, but it's just going to have a hard time finding a home. And then our final card here is Mad Thinker. This is a 1/1 at the start of each turn after you draw your card, +2 power if your hand is full. So this is, you know, potentially a lot of scaling here, because +2 per hit is nice. Now, turn 1, that's basically never ever going to happen. It might technically be possible with location help or something, but usually, you know, your hand will not be full on turn 1 because you haven't had time to add stuff to hand yet. So this really doesn't maybe start scaling reliably until turn 2, and that's really kind of turn 3 at the start of turn 3, right? Because turn 2 is when you'd add something to hand. So turn 3 is when it would start scaling. So like 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the turns you might be able to maintain a full hand, which is 4 turns. That's +2 power each. That's +8. That makes this a 1/9 if things go perfectly. And I think it's going to be really hard to make things go perfectly. Because, you know, I was thinking about like decks that might want to do this. You know, like we've seen like skill decks like Merlin, right? Like Merlin's really good to keep your hand full sometimes. Kind of a Merlin Kahori package or whatever. But if you play this on 1 and Merlin on 2, you're still not going to have a full hand on turn 3 when you start turn 3, right? You'd need more help again on turn 3 because you've been playing cards out, right? Like Mad Thinker is a card you played out. Merlin's a card you played out. You're emptying the hand. You're not replacing it fast enough. So you have to almost like divert and play like a Snow Guard first or something, and then a Mad Thinker. And I don't even know, right? It's hard to like get the hand full fast enough. Where I think, you know, if this is going to be hitting, it's usually going to be hitting on like turn 4, 5, and 6, which, you know, theoretically is still +6, and that's kind of good, but it's not crazy. And there's going to be moments where it just doesn't work because you need to play stuff out, or, you know, random discards happen. It's like it's often going to end up as a 1/3 or a 1/5 just because the game unfolded in a way that you didn't like, I think. So I don't know, man. Like maybe Merlin gives us enough life, just because he does really nicely, you know, fill in that hand at the start of the turn for you. Like, it's not impossible. I just don't think it's going to be reliable enough or big enough that it's, like, exciting to do that. Like, are you really going to want to commit to that? Is there a collector, Kahori, Devil Dinosaur thing with Mad Thinker? Like, it's possible. I could see it. Like, I understand the goals, the targets. I just think it's going to be a bit awkward, and this won't make it worth it to run that deck, and it's not currently necessarily worth it to run that deck. Like, we do see Kahori Merlin stuff, but you're not trying to keep your hand full, right? Like, you'd have to shift the style of play, your strategy, and the deck, all of those to fit in a Mad Thinker, and he's not good enough in my mind to make it worth doing that. I'd rather just be able to play out my cards and do my thing. So in other words, the juice is not worth the squeeze, I think, as people say. Like, I just don't think the reward here pays off enough, and therefore I think Mad Thinker's probably gonna fall a bit short. All right, so that is all of the cards this month. Let's now rate these from 1 to 4 stars, starting with the best card. Mr. Fantastic is a 4-star card. Human Torch is a 4-star card. Fantasticar is a 4-star card. H.E.R.B.I.E is a 4-star card. Invisible Woman is a 3-star card. The Thing is a 3-star card. Mole Man is a 2-star card. The Mad Thinker is a 2-star card. And yeah, guys, there you go, man. Big month, I think. Multiple 4-star cards for me, like potentially just like, you know, new meta defining decks popping up here with buff stuff, first step stuff, end of turn stuff, some like good general use cards as well with Mr. Fantastic. I think gonna be a pretty important month of cards here. Marvel Snap might look very different by the end of this month. So share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching. Stay tuned for lots of videos covering all these cards and more. And I guess I will see you around.